My father-in-law smashed my 40th birthday cake off the table while laughing. Whoops, lost my grip. Without saying a word, I picked up his prized vintage guitar worth $45,000 and dropped it straight into the bonfire. But the real betrayal was only beginning to surface. The wood caught faster than I expected. I stood at the edge of the fire pit and watched the lacquer on Roland's 1962 guitar begin to bubble. That sunburst Gibson he mentioned in nearly every conversation. The one he'd pulled out at 3 separate family gatherings just to let people hold it for a photo, each time making sure everyone understood what it had appraised for. The coals beneath it glowed steady and orange. The smoke went from thin and pale to something thicker, with a sharp resin smell that made my sister-in-law take an actual step backward. Behind me, the patio had gone completely silent. Not shock silence, not the gasp then whisper kind. This was something else. The specific quiet that settles over a group of people who've just watched something they secretly wanted to happen and can't quite believe it actually did. Roland's shout broke it first. My guitar! Felicity, do something! He's lost his mind. My husband crossed the yard in 5 steps. His face had gone the color of the napkins still scattered across the grass. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. He looked at the fire, then at me, then back at the fire. The specific back and forth of someone watching an accident in slow motion, trying to find the exact second he could have stopped it. Dad, do you have any idea what that guitar is worth? I looked at him for a long moment, long enough to let everything inside me settle into something that wasn't rage, wasn't grief, wasn't the tremor I was working hard to keep out of my hands. Whoops, I said, lost my grip. The patio stayed silent. That was the beginning of the end, just not the end I expected. My name is Theodore Mackey. I am 63 years old. I spent 29 years building a home with my wife Annette, not as a figure of speech, an actual home with actual lumber, on 3 acres outside a small town in Vermont where the mail carrier still waves from the road and the man at the hardware store still calls me by my first name because Annette used to bring him pie every Christmas before she passed. Annette had been a master carpenter, one of the only women doing finished carpentry in our county back when she started, and she'd built half this house herself. She framed the sunroom, fought with the plumber for 3 days about pipe placement, and laid every floorboard in the living room on her hands and knees because she said a floor rushed by someone else never feels right under bare feet. She was right. 29 years later, not one board has so much as creaked wrong. She died of ovarian cancer 4 years ago, on a Monday in late March, which I've come to think is a cruel month to lose someone, because everything outside is starting to come back to life while you're inside, trying to remember how to keep going. We had 31 years together. I cleaned out her workshop alone on a Sunday, slowly, organizing her tools exactly the way she always kept them, because rushing it felt like losing her twice, and asking for help with something that private felt impossible. My daughter Felicity was 35 when her mother died. She lived 2 towns over with her husband Desmond. No, with her husband Roland's son, my son-in-law Nathaniel, working as a hospital administrator, calling most Sundays. After Annette passed, she started coming by for dinner once a week. We'd sit at the kitchen table and talk about her mother, the town, whatever small thing had happened that week. I was grateful for it. I believed we were holding each other up the way family is supposed to. 9 months ago, she called to tell me they were moving in, not that they were considering it, not that there'd been some setback worth discussing together first. She called on a Wednesday morning while I was out clearing brush to tell me Nathaniel's job had relocated their division, that their lease had fallen through unexpectedly, and that they needed to stay with me for a little while until they found something new. I stood in my yard holding the brush cutter and said, of course, because she's my daughter. Because Annette would have said the exact same thing without a second of hesitation. Because that is precisely what you build a house for. A little while had now stretched to 9 months, and Nathaniel's father, Roland, had moved in with them 3 months in, after his own apartment lease ended, and nobody, apparently, thought to discuss that with me first either. Roland arrived with a U-Haul trailer, 4 guitar cases, and a presence that filled every room he entered the way smoke does. You didn't notice it had settled in until you were already breathing through it. He was pleasant at first. He brought a bottle of good scotch the first weekend, called me Ted with what seemed like real warmth, and asked thoughtful questions about the property with his head tilted, eyes moving across my living room in a way I read, at the time, as genuine interest. I thought, this might actually work out. Maybe I've been alone long enough that I've forgotten what it's like to have other people in the house. Maybe I've grown too particular about my own space. The first thing he changed was the mantel. Mine held a row of small carved birds Annette had made over the years, whittled in the evenings while she watched television, simple little things, nothing valuable except to me. I came into the living room one morning, 10 days after he'd moved in, to find them gone. In their place sat a glass display case holding 3 of his guitars, lit from beneath by a small LED strip he'd installed himself. Hope you don't mind, Roland said from the recliner, not looking up from the television. Needed somewhere to properly display these. Climate matters with instruments like this. I looked at the display case. Then I looked at the side table where Annette's wedding photo used to sit. It was gone. Where's the photo? I asked. Moved it to the hallway. cluttered up the mantel area. He adjusted the case slightly. You'll get used to the setup. These guitars need to breathe. That was the first moment I felt it clearly. Not anger exactly, something colder, more precise. The recognition that this man was operating on a logic entirely his own, with no intention of asking my opinion before rearranging my life around it. I told myself, it's his space too for now. He's settling in. Be patient. I should have stopped telling myself that much sooner than I did. Over the following 5 months, my house slowly became somebody else's house. Annette's carved birds, 14 of them, collected over 2 decades, vanished from the box I'd moved them into one Tuesday while I was at a doctor's appointment. I found them in a plastic tote in the garage, stacked between holiday decorations. When I mentioned it that evening, Felicity stared at her plate and said, Roland thought the mantle needed to look more cohesive. There wasn't really a good spot for all of them. There was a spot for 20 years, I said. She didn't respond. The wedding photo migrated from the hallway to a closet, and then, 1 week in early autumn, from the closet to a box in the basement, wrapped in an old towel. When I confronted Roland about it directly, he arranged his face into something gentle and concerned and explained he'd been doing a space audit because he found too many personal photographs distracting in shared areas. He said it the way people say things they've rehearsed, smooth, confident, and then went back to tuning one of his guitars. He told Felicity my cooking was a bit much for his palate these days. Not once, repeatedly. At the table in front of me with a small wince, he'd flash and withdraw quickly, as if he was simply being honest, as if honesty were a kindness he was extending to me. He told her I kept the thermostat too low, that I talked too long about the property's history when people who didn't care were around, that my evenings in the workshop, fixing small things, made noise that interfered with his practicing. She relayed all of this to me as gentle suggestions. Roland was just saying he thinks maybe. I kept waiting for her to add, but I told him that's not how we talk about you in this house. She never did. There is a particular kind of erosion that happens slowly, deliberately, one small thing at a time. A carved bird here, a photograph there, a comment over breakfast, and it does something different to a person than a single blow does. You can recover from a blow. This other thing works the way water works on stone. Patient, persistent, entirely indifferent to your resistance. I started to wonder if I was being unreasonable, if I'd grown too attached to small things, if Roland's quiet concern about my difficulty adjusting, which he voiced to Felicity privately but which always somehow found its way to me, was, in some measure, fair. I started to wonder. I think that was exactly the point. The 40th birthday was for Felicity, organized by my late wife's sister, my sister-in-law Joan. Joan is 70, blunt to the point of being structurally incapable of subtlety, and constitutionally unable to watch her niece quietly fade out of her own father's life without saying something direct about it. Though in this case, it was me she'd noticed fading, in my own house. When I told her on the phone in late September about the birds and the photo and the comments at dinner, she went quiet for nearly 5 seconds and then said, Ted, that man is sanding you down and your daughter is holding the paper. You don't know that for certain, I said, still trying to be fair. I know it exactly, and so do you if you'd stop pretending otherwise. She insisted on organizing Felicity's 40th in my backyard, small, 6 of us, a cake from the bakery in town I'd used for 30 years, my yard, my daughter's birthday, an evening that should have meant I could simply exist comfortably in a space that was mine. I want to be clear about what happened. I was not provoking anyone. I was sitting at my own table in chairs arranged on the patio my late wife had poured herself, eating cake I'd ordered, surrounded by people I loved. Roland came outside around 8:30, dressed for somewhere else entirely. Pressed shirt, his good watch, cologne he wore when he wanted to seem important. He moved through the gathering the way people move through a room they consider beneath them, scanning, dismissing, wearing a faint private smile I'd learned over 9 months to read accurately. It meant, I'm about to do something. He stopped near the cake table. 3 tiers, candles spelling 40. He looked at it. Then he looked at me, his expression rearranging into something approximating sympathy. Another grocery store cake, Ted? He stretched out the word grocery like he was savoring it. 40 deserves better, doesn't it? My sister-in-law Joan made a low sound in her throat. My neighbor's face went still. Roland reached across the table for something, his drink, I think, and his forearm caught the edge of the cake stand. It went over. The cake hit the patio with a sound far louder than I expected. Frosting smeared across the concrete Annette had poured and finished herself one September decades ago. The candles scattered into the grass, wicks pointed sideways, extinguished before they'd properly burned. Nobody moved. Roland straightened his cuff. He glanced at the mess with mild irritation, like a man assessing a minor inconvenience rather than something he'd caused. Whoops, he said. Lost my grip. My son-in-law Nathaniel was standing near the grill, spatula in hand. His face went red. His mouth stayed shut. He said nothing. I am 63 years old. I have given a eulogy. I have cleaned out a dead woman's workshop alone. I have signed papers at a county office that legally confirmed my wife no longer existed, in a town where half the Finnish carpentry still bears her hand. I know exactly what it costs to hold yourself together when every part of you wants to come apart. I stood still for 3 seconds. I counted them silently. Then I walked over to the case Roland had set on a chair earlier, the sunburst Gibson resting inside it, the lid left open so people could admire it. I picked it up by the neck. I crossed the yard in 11 steps. I stood at the edge of the fire pit my wife had built into the patio for evenings exactly like this. I dropped it in. The shouting started immediately. Roland's voice climbed to a register I'd genuinely never heard from a grown man. Raw, disbelieving, the voice of someone whose presence had never once failed to control a room before. Felicity rushed toward the fire pit, then stopped, then looked at Roland, then looked at me. The lacquer was already bubbling, the strings beginning to curl and snap from the heat. My guitar! He's lost his mind. Nathaniel, do something. Dad! Nathaniel's voice cracked on the word in a way I recognized. He'd used that crack his whole life when he knew he was wrong but hoped the sound of distress might work where reasoning hadn't. Dad, do you have any idea what that's worth? Whoops, I said, for the second time that evening. Lost my grip. The yard was silent. Not the earlier shame silence, the one that had kept 6 adults frozen while a man knocked a cake to the ground and laughed about it. This silence was different. I felt the air shift around me. Joan looked at me across the yard with an expression I intend to remember for the rest of my life. My guests left carefully, squeezing my hand on their way past. Joan was last out. She held both my hands and said nothing for a moment, then, call me tonight if you need to. Then she left. Roland was on his phone before the gate had even closed. That night I lay in bed and listened to the house settle the way old houses do, creaking, exhaling, and I heard Felicity in the hallway outside my door. Her voice was low. She believed I was asleep. She was speaking with the particular, careful softness of someone certain they aren't being heard. In the hallway outside my door. Her voice was low. She believed I was asleep. She was speaking with the particular, careful softness of someone certain they aren't being heard. If we get him to sign the medical power of attorney, we can move forward with the assisted living conversation. We split whatever's left after the house sells. I didn't move. I breathed slowly. In, out. The doctor route will take too long to build a case, she continued. If he signs it himself, it's so much cleaner. You tell him it's just precautionary. He trusts you completely. A pause. Nathaniel's voice, lower, something I couldn't make out clearly. Then Felicity again. He threw Roland's guitar into a fire tonight, Nathaniel. Any reasonable person looking at that would have questions. We just need to document a few more incidents. The thermostat thing, the repetition, tonight. We build the file. I lay in the dark and let those words settle into the shape they actually were. And I understood something I'd been circling for months without quite landing on it. My daughter had not simply failed to protect me. She had let herself become part of something. I still don't know how much she'd designed and how much she'd simply been carried along by her husband, by her father-in-law, by some combination of obligation and exhaustion I might never fully untangle. But she had stood at the edge of that yard while a man humiliated her own father in front of everyone he loved, and she had said nothing. She had relayed Roland's complaints as gentle suggestions for months. She had watched her mother's wedding photo migrate from the mantel to the hallway to a closet to a box in the basement, and she had never once said, "This is his home, and that is my mother." I lay still until I heard their door close. Then I got up, went to the kitchen, and made a list. I was at the bank when it opened at 9 a.m. After Annette died, I had added Felicity to one of my accounts at her gentle suggestion. She'd framed it simply, for emergencies, in case something happened to me and she needed quick access. I had trusted her completely. That is the sentence I kept returning to over the following days. I had trusted her, and I kept having to decide whether that trust had simply been wrong or whether it had been taken from me. The teller, a young woman named Priya, had careful eyes and the manner of someone used to delivering bad news gently. I asked her to print every statement from the joint account for the past year. I sat in the chair near the window and went through them line by line. A music equipment retailer, 4 separate charges over 5 months, totaling well past what any reasonable hobbyist would spend. A weekend at a lakeside resort midweek in August. 2 charges from a vintage instrument appraiser. Restoration work on something described only as stringed instrument, 1962. Withdrawal after withdrawal, each kept just under the threshold that would have triggered an automatic alert, which told me someone had taken real care to learn exactly where that threshold sat. $190,000. My savings. The proceeds from selling Annette's small woodworking business after she passed. Money I'd moved into that account specifically because Felicity had said it would be safer and easier to manage together. My hands were shaking. My voice was not. I'd like this account closed today, I told Priya. Everything remaining transferred into a new account in my name only. Cancel every card linked to it. All of them, immediately. Sir, she said carefully, the other account holder will receive a notification when— I understand completely, I said. Close it anyway. She closed it. Felicity called at 1:35 p.m. I know the time because I wrote it down. Dad, Roland's card got declined. At the appraiser's office. In front of the appraiser. What did you do? I closed the account. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was for— No, I said. I made him pay for his own hobby for once. She was still talking when I set the phone down. I stood at my kitchen window and looked out at the yard for a long while. The old maple Annette had planted the spring Felicity was born was still standing, still throwing the same deep shade across the back half of the property. I thought about the afternoon we'd planted it together, her digging while I argued about depth, both of us certain we were right. She usually was. Then I called my sister-in-law Joan. Then I called a lawyer. Attorney Walter Bisset had practiced family and estate law in our county for 24 years. His office sat above the pharmacy on Main Street, a single hardy fern on the windowsill, and a framed degree from the State University behind his desk. He shook my hand, offered me coffee, and sat across from me with a legal pad, and I told him everything. The account, the withdrawals, the timeline, what I'd overheard through the door, the plan Felicity had described, the power of attorney, the assisted living conversation, the house sale. I laid the bank statements across his desk in chronological order. Walter read through them without speaking, making small, precise notes in the margins. $190,000, he said. Not as a question. Yes, your daughter is the joint account holder. Her name is on the original setup, though the spending pattern itself appears to track much more closely with Roland and Nathaniel's purchases. I don't know the exact proportion, I said. I know the purchases relate entirely to Roland's hobby. I know some of them happened while my daughter was at work, with no plausible reason for her to have authorized them in real time. And I know that as of last night, she knew exactly what they were planning for my house and my future. He looked up. I told him about the small recorder I'd left running on the hallway bookshelf beside the lamp because after lying awake until nearly dawn, I'd decided that words I couldn't prove had happened might as well not have happened. Walter listened to the recording twice. On the second pass, he made 3 separate notes. When he set the recorder down, he was quiet for a moment. This is admissible in a civil proceeding under most circumstances, he said. Vermont's one-party consent laws on your own property work in your favor here. Combined with the financial records, this is a substantial documentary case. He folded his hands. Ted, what you've described meets the threshold for financial elder abuse under state statute. It could also support a civil claim for conversion and breach of fiduciary duty, given the joint account arrangement. And attempting to obtain a power of attorney using manufactured evidence of incapacity is a serious aggravating factor. He paused. I'd like to bring in a colleague who handles the elder abuse side specifically. Whatever it takes, I said. Attorney Naomi Iverson had spent 12 years as a county prosecutor before moving into private practice focused on elder financial abuse. She was 49, deliberate, with the particular stillness of someone who'd spent her career across the table from people trying to mislead her and had gotten very good at noticing it. She shook my hand once firmly and asked 3 questions before I'd fully sat down. Did I own the house outright? Did I have documentation of Annette's estate, the will, the business sale proceeds, the deed? Did I have a current, valid will of my own? Yes, technically, but it badly needed updating. We'll fix that today, she said. Over the following 5 days, in Naomi's office, at a notary's office 2 blocks down, and at the bank with a manager named Russell who understood immediately what I was describing, I built a wall. A legal trust was established, placing the house, the remaining savings, and Annette's estate into a structure managed by Naomi and my sister-in-law Joan as co-trustees. The house could not be sold, mortgaged, or transferred in any way without written consent from both. Any power of attorney, no matter who signed it or when, would carry no legal weight against the trust's protections. The document ran 36 pages. I signed every page in blue ink. Naomi filed the final form at 4:10 p.m. on a Friday. I sat across from her after her assistant had stepped out and said, "They'll figure it out eventually." Yes, she said. That's exactly how it's supposed to work. He looked at the appraiser's invoices and the restoration charges Naomi's paralegal had cross-referenced, and he stopped at one. This invoice, he said, holding up the page, storage unit rental, paid through a separate account, registered under Roland Whitfield's name, not your daughter's or son-in-law's. He looked up. He's been storing additional instruments off-site. Doesn't appear anywhere in what your family told you he owned. I didn't know there was a storage unit, I said. They rarely advertise it. Detective Webb made a note. Mr. Mackey, I want to be straightforward about the timeline. These investigations move through an initial review, a referral to the DA's office, a formal interview process. I understand, I said. I'm not in any hurry. He looked at me the way people had been looking at me all week, recalibrating something. You're remarkably calm about all this, he said. I know exactly what I have, I told him, and I know exactly what I'm asking for. I don't want drama. I want it on the record, and I want it to follow them. He wrote that down too. On a Saturday morning, 11 days after the birthday, I came downstairs at 7:15 to find Felicity and Nathaniel at the kitchen table. Nathaniel was in his weekend clothes, looking deliberately relaxed. Felicity wore the soft cardigan she always reached for when she wanted to seem gentle and worried. They'd made coffee in my machine. A document sat centered on the table between them, 2 pens laid neatly beside it. Dad, Felicity said, her voice carrying that careful, rehearsed softness. Sit down with us. We want to talk. I sat. Nathaniel folded his hands. He'd arranged his face into something resembling worry. He'd practiced this. I am a 63-year-old man with decades of reading faces across a dinner table. I know exactly what practice looks like. Ted, he said, we're genuinely worried about you. What happened at the birthday party? You mean when your father knocked Felicity's birthday cake onto the ground? It raised some concerns alongside a few other things we've noticed. The thermostat, the repetition. We had a conversation with Dr. Aldis. He's not my doctor. He's a geriatric specialist, Felicity said smoothly. He explained that sudden behavioral shifts like the one with the guitar can sometimes point to early cognitive changes. We're not saying this to hurt you. We're saying it because we love you and want you properly taken care of. She slid the document toward me. It's It's just a power of attorney. Standard. Just in case something were to happen. Felicity. She stopped. I let the silence sit. I know about the account, I said. All $190,000. Every transaction, every date, every charge tied to your father-in-law's hobby. I watched Nathaniel's jaw tighten. I know about the storage unit under Roland's name. Felicity's hands shifted slightly on the table. I know what you said in the hallway 11 nights ago. And I know what you said again the next morning at 7:30 in this kitchen while I was supposedly still asleep. Nobody spoke. There's a legal trust, I said, filed and recorded with the county last Friday. This house, my savings, your mother's estate, all of it is held by the trust. My attorney and your Aunt Joan are co-trustees. The house cannot be sold, mortgaged, or transferred without both of their written consent. Your names are not on it. Neither of you, and neither is Roland's. I watched the color leave Felicity's face in a slow, steady way, like water draining from a basin. Nathaniel's expression moved through disbelief, then quick calculation, then something older and far less composed. You can't do that, Felicity said. It's my inheritance. It's my house, I said, that I built with your mother with our own hands over 29 years. You've lived in it for 9 months, and you have not once said thank you. Not once. We'll contest it, Nathaniel said. His voice had lost its softness entirely, his mental competency alone. My attorney is Naomi Iverson, 12 years as a county prosecutor before she went into private practice. Her card is by the phone. Call her directly if you'd like. I set my hands flat on the table. Also, Detective Marcus Webb of the county's Elder Abuse Unit will be reaching out to all 3 of you on Monday. Yes, Roland included. The complaint is already filed. The financial records, the storage unit, the recording, all of it has been submitted. The investigation is formal now. The coffee maker clicked off. The kitchen went very quiet. I'd like all 3 of you out of my house, I said, by the end of the month. My attorney has already sent formal written notice with that exact date, so there's no ambiguity for any of you. I stood up. I went to the hall closet. The box of Annette's carved birds had been sitting there since I'd found them in the garage. I had quietly brought it back inside the week before. I took out the smallest one, a little wren, the first thing she ever carved, rough around the edges in a way the later ones weren't, the wood worn smooth from decades of my thumb running over it. I set it on the mantel, in the empty space where Roland's display case had been. Then I turned around and looked at them, my daughter frozen at the table, and the man who had spent 9 months trying to quietly walk me out of my own life, one careful piece at a time, the exact same patient way his father had replaced the mantle and moved the photograph and stored his guitars off-site without a word. You made one mistake, I said. You thought I was whatever this house looked like without your mother in it, that I was just what gets left over after grief. Empty, easy, something you could walk through and rearrange and slowly clear out until it belonged to someone else. I looked around the kitchen, the counters, the window, the yard beyond it, the old maple still throwing its long shade. This house has my name on the deed. It has 29 years of your mother's hands in its frame. It will still be standing long after all 3 of you have moved on to whatever you think you can take next. I picked up the little wren and carried it out to the yard. Behind me, I heard them talking, Felicity's voice sharp and quick, Nathaniel's lower, answering, but I didn't try to follow the words. Some conversations don't need an audience. The maple was deep green in the morning light, the way it always is in early autumn before the color starts to turn. Annette had planted it the spring our daughter was born. I remember her digging the hole, the 2 of us arguing pleasantly about depth, her absolutely certain she was right. I sat in my chair, in my yard, in my house, and held the little wren in my palm until the morning warmed all the way through. 4 months later, the financial investigation was formally opened by the district attorney's office. Detective Webb called on a Wednesday afternoon to let me know that cross-referencing the charges against Roland's separate income records had confirmed the storage unit and a significant portion of the restoration costs had been funded entirely through my joint account without my knowledge, while he claimed publicly to be living modestly off a fixed retirement income. The case was referred for charges in early winter. The storage unit was cleared out 3 weeks after they all moved out of my house. I don't know where Roland relocated his collection. Felicity has called me 3 times since. I've answered each one. We talk for a few minutes, never very long. I don't know yet what we are to each other now, and I think she doesn't either. I suspect that question will take longer to answer than any investigation, longer than any court date, maybe longer than either of us currently expects. I've stopped trying to hurry it along. My neighbor brought me a pie in October. No occasion, he said, just because. We ate it on the back patio, at the table where the cake had hit the ground weeks earlier. We didn't talk about the party. We talked about the maple needing a trim before winter, and a book we'd both read. It doesn't need trimming yet, I told him. It knows exactly what it's doing. The mantle has all 14 birds back on it now. Annette's wedding photo is back on the side table, right where it's always belonged. Most evenings, I sit on the patio and talk to her the way I always have, and I tell her what's been happening, and I tell her the house is still ours. It is still ours. That's enough.